to this morning before we present this? I'm sorry? I didn't hear it.
Okay, it's PowerPoint. You have a PowerPoint for him?
Yes, if you have a question, go ahead and ask it. I don't profess to have all the answers, but what I do have, I'll share it.
He asking for his PowerPoint? Is he asking for his PowerPoint? Yes, go ahead and get his PowerPoint.
Mutation.
Yeah, what was it?
That's what the Chinese geneticist was talking about. Dr. Keith Ching, he said that, you see, here's what happened. People think that when God created Adam and Eve, that he created one was brown, one was white, and one was black. That's not what happened. The Bible makes it plain. The Bible says in Genesis 2:7 that God created man from the dust, the clay-like dust of the ground, and the word Adam itself means black. So God created Adam from black clay soil. All humanity came from black people. If you look at the color spectrum, everything goes back to black. So now, when the flood came, Noah was 600 years old. His sons were about 100 years old. They had been used to seeing each other bathe in the rivers. They didn't have no private bathrooms back there. And so they bathed in the river just like people in Africa do today. When I go to Africa, people are standing in the rivers, they're taking their baths, and nobody's ashamed, nobody's looking at nobody, nobody's like you see in the West. Ooh, what I see. No, people taking a bath. When the women are breastfeeding, they call that the baby bottle. Ain't nobody's ashamed of, only in the West do people see that as a sexual object. Okay, you got it, okay, got it. So what happens is that when you look at when Adam, after the flood, when people start migrating out of Africa, they went into the colder climates. In a tropical climate, there's a gland in your brain called the pineal gland. The pineal gland produces melanin, which gives skin pigmentation. It's called euromelanin. And what happens, melanin is produced between the hours of 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. in the morning. Melanin helps you to feel good about yourself. Melanin, when the sperm fertilizes the egg, melanin is right there at the inception to help regulate all those cells. So what happens then, melanin helps you to feel good about yourself. Melanin is what gives, when basketball players used to play, you remember back in the 60s, they used to do the 1-2 layup? You that know basketball, the basketball players wear these little short pants. They don't wear them now, they wear the long pants. They see these little short pants, 1-2 layup. And black ball players could jump real high. So you know what white supremacy said? They said that the reason that blacks can jump high is because they have an extra muscle in their leg, in their calf. That's what makes them able to jump that high. Well, what we found out is that it wasn't no extra muscle in your calf. What happened is that melanin gives you the ability to move and jump. Not only that, but melanin helps you to sense things. That's why in the Far East they call it the third eye. Melanin is like the size of a pea, a kernel of corn. It produces a pitch black substance. And what melanin does, it helps you not only to sense things, but it helps you to be able to perceive. It picks up energy. So what melanin does is this. Have you ever seen the Texas Chainsaw Murders, which you're not supposed to be watching? You all remember that? The guy with the mask, and Jason would come with his chainsaw, and people would hear, they would see Jason with the mask on, and they would hear, And then white people say, Bob, is that you out there, Bob? And they would go out and get killed. But melanated people sense things. Black folk will sit there, shoo, 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 shoo. Somebody said, what would they do? They run. No, they don't run first. Man, this don't feel right. I pick up vibe. I'm not going out there. Then they run. Melanin gives you that sense. And so, what makes black people move? Melanin. What do you mean, preacher? You know, when they sway, when the choir is singing and they do this? Early in my ministry, I did not understand about melanin because I never studied it. So when they used to say, no, you're not going to be doing that in here. This is the Church of the Living God. No, you're not going to be doing that. Yeah, yeah, this is the Adventist church. You're not going to do that. And so what I found out is that when white folk have worship, they're more quiet than we are because they have less melanin than we have. Melanin is what makes Mexicans and Spanish people, yeah. Melanin makes you move. It gives you energy. So when we're moving and we're bouncing to a beat, we're rhythmic. We talk in rhythm. When I tell you, how you doing, Pastor Bill? I say, oh, I'm just chilling. I don't mean I'm cold. I'm talking in rhythm. Back in the 60s, we said, how you doing? Oh, everything is everything. What do you mean? Everything is cool. Right on. Thank you. Right on, brother. Everything is fine. So we always talked in rhythm. Hey, brother. Hey, sister. How you doing? We've always spoken in rhythm. That's the way we've done. That's part of our makeup. If you see a brother that's big and tall, you say, hey, big man. His name could be Ron. You say, hey, big man. You call him a nickname automatically. You know, so melanin is what makes us move. It gives us a sense of energy. Melanin helps you really, some people believe it puts you in touch with God. I don't know too much about that, but I do know that melanin has that, there's something there. And black people, that's why we move. That's why we rhythm clap. That's what, so when white people say, y'all are too noisy. No, we're not too noisy. We're doing and worshiping God with the ability and the talents that he's given us. He gave us more melanin than you. That's why we worship like we worship. You worship differently because you don't have as much melanin as I have. So you can't, see, black people can pick up, oh boy, how to put this before I hit the screen. Musicians have what they call a note. They can hear music, right? Well, black folk can hear music different ways. We pick up music easy because that's, when I go to Africa, everybody's singing. Truckloads of people riding on, and they're all singing all the time. Hey, praise the Lord. They're singing everywhere you go, they're singing. When they have morning prayer service in the camp meetings that I've been to, when they come early in the morning, it sounds so beautiful. It had me crying one morning because I said, man, these must be the original people of God. No, melanin has not been lost. Yeah, when their skin, when they mutated, they had mutation, they changed for a lighter skin color. They don't have as much melanin as we have. As a matter of fact, white people have been studying melanin for 40 years before they let us know what they were studying. Their pineal gland is calcified. It does not ooze as much. Ours run freely, Latinos and blacks. But theirs don't run as fluid as ours. It's kind of like real slow. So they don't have as much as we have. They have melanin, but they don't have as much. That's why they don't move like we move. Now they're learning to do it now. So because they don't have the rhythm, maybe they don't have enough melanin. It's not, no, it's sometimes that we, like I don't have a lot of rhythm. My father didn't have a lot of rhythm. So I'm like my father. I can do one, two-step, but I don't have really, like some people can move and really move. I can't do that. Yes, sir.
When we hear the word evolution, we think it's all bad. Okay. But
True, true.
blacks move further north. There were evolutionary processes that take place within further north is colder. Right? Skin complexions begin to change. If I take a bird, like a pigeon,
Mm-hmm.
and I take that pigeon to a seaside, and the only food for that pigeon is in the sea, over time that pigeon will grow feet that can allow it to swim.
Mm-hmm.
That's an evolutionary process. So as the people migrated north, and the pigmentation changed as well, because the weather also played a part on them as well. So the word evolution is not always a bad word, but it happens in life as you go through.
Hey, thank you. No, this.
So you guys are saying that the body is built to do whatever kind of adaptation it needs to do.
Yes, to survive.
So it can
To survive.
survive.
Yes.
Yes, it does. As a matter of fact, when you look at the epicanthic eye, that slanted eye you call the Chinese have, how did they get that? Well, through years of them squinting when the snows and winds would be blowing, that was passed on genetically to your ancestors. You see, there's what we call, I don't know whether you've heard this, it's called the red nucleus. Have you heard the red nucleus? There's a red nucleus that is passed on genetically. What happened to our ancestors is in you. It's in your brain. You know, you feel it, you sense it. You may not know everything that happened, but it's there because it's passed on for the survival of the species. So when they were squinting, trying to get through that snow and ice, they were squinting. Years of that, they took on that evolutionary process. Because Doc says all evolution is not bad. Everything evolves. You can look at it, it does. It evolves. You can see that. But it's not, we're not talking about evolution like a man changed from a man to a monkey. I'm not talking about that. So what happens then is that when they lost their ability to produce that amount of melanin, then their pigmentation got lighter because they were now in the cold climates. They were not in the sunshine, the tropics like we were. And so that's the best I can give you on that. But they didn't lose it. They just lost some of their ability to produce as much melanin as we have.
Put it this way, men have testosterone. As you get older, it decreases.
Now,
So you go up north and you enjoy cold climate. You don't need the dark complexion to protect you. So you just lose it.
yeah,
Agent.
that's a good way to put it. I see his hand, then I come to you, my sister. Yes.
I was thinking about something that he said because I brought a pumpkin from Jamaica. I know where he was.
Mm-hmm.
Right down the road in Canada, and he comes up with this and told me that he said, same pumpkin, but the color of color.
Wow.
The outside of it.
Wonderful. That's beautiful.
And I was thinking about the eye. Well, how does the hair turn from that person light mind to making
I'm not a scientist, but I do know this. I do know that black folk have helical. Our hair is like a DNA helix sign. There's a reason why people in tropical climates have the kind of nappy hair that we have. It helps our brains to cool. Whereas when Europeans, they have the kind that lay down and cover their brains. Ours, yeah, you have to have aeration. Same thing with, well, they're debating about this, Saints. I'm telling you, some of what I say, Europeans will eat this, they will run this out of the ground and say, no, you're not. I'm not against Europeans, but this thing here is, I'm not against Europeans, but I know what they have done to my history in the past. And I know when you go to the schools designed by Europeans for Europeans, you come out thinking like they think. And you do. That's why you see what's happening in Africa now, when all of them are making money for themselves, getting rich, and you got the richest continent on planet Earth and the poorest people on the planet. And that doesn't make sense. But that's because we go to their schools and they teach us capitalism, which is not a bad thing in itself, but there are some fallbacks, I think, to capitalism, whereas I think socialism does a little bit better in some areas.
Hey, you're living in America now. What?
Yeah, I know. Trump, yeah, I know, he may come and get me, but he'll have a hard time.
So you're saying then, we must maintain a decent balance
Yes.
so that we don't fall off the wagon, as it were.
You got to have balance. Everything you got to do balance. Even when nature teaches you got to be balanced.
So, going back to Brother White's question a little bit here, I think the descendant of Japhet, right, were the ones that have the there like European.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the years, the mutation continued. And based on those countries, if you look at the Italians, their hair color is different than those in Spain, and those in England, those in Norway. So it depends on where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Through the years, it changes and changes and changes. And it's amazing. Look at the lines of latitude across Russia. The Russians look different than the Indians.
Yeah.
Completely, right? Then you go further across, there's the Chinese. Look completely different. Different languages, different culture, everything, right? Throughout the years, gene mutation has taken place. And you have to understand this. Sin did not just do one thing to humankind.
Come on, Doc.
God must have written it in our DNA so that the system could adjust. Yes. So as someone had said, it's not necessarily bad. With God, that means
it is. Hello? Yes.
Okay, you might have pressed something then.
I tell you what, can I take that one?
Yeah,
That one sounds a little better. Hear this thing sound again.
I think I need to change battery this also.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Now I forgot where I was. Oh, yeah. Thank you, sir. Africa is a flat tableland, so Africa is high. When you look, see, if you, in order to understand what the Bible is saying, you have to know the language. When you look at the Hebrew language and look at the Greek language, if you don't understand the language, you won't understand what's being said, so you can apply it to what's happening today. When there's several things, if I get into that, I'm going to be too late and I can't get into what I really want to get into because I promised 45 minutes. But yeah, Africans, the whole world were African people. We were dark people. We were crystal black. When mutation came in, that's what created what you have these different various colors and things because of migration and going to different parts of the climate, cold, some hot. Yes, sir. No, mutation is not bad. In a sense, everything, I mean, maybe you can, y'all that know this stuff. Wait a minute, could you say that again? I don't think they heard you, but I'd like you to say that because that's very important, what you just said.
I said that there's good mutation, there's bad mutation. If you think of cancer, it's a form of mutation, and you have other diseases that come, like cystic fibrosis is a mutation in the gene that cause that. But when you think of mutation that gives some people that make them really powerful, like if you think of LeBron James, that when he plays, he has so much energy that he has so much power. So that's a good mutation.
And sometimes when you do drug creation, you actually mutate certain genes and certain proteins to stop those diseases. So there is manipulation of gene therapy based on different things. So there, as Sister Elmi said, there's good mutation happens all the time, every time. That's most drug. How we do drugs by, treating diseases. We mutate the protein from going from one stage to another stage or change up the transportation so it doesn't follow the same path.
Okay, thank you, doctors. I'm sorry. I appreciate it so much. Which one? Where's the pointer? See. This is on? Okay. All right. I did this presentation, and it was entitled Critical Race Theory. As you know, the governor of the state of Florida has said that between the ages of the grades kindergarten and fourth grade, we cannot teach what they call critical race theory. Critical race theory really, in reality, has nothing to do with race at all. A group of scholars got together, and they put the theorem together of how systemic racism has denied us as a people, ever since we were in this country, proper education. As a matter of fact, it has affected us on all 9 levels of society: entertainment, education, economics, labor, law, politics, war, sex, and religion. Racism operates in all 9 levels of society. And so what they don't want us to talk about it, because it makes people that look different from us feel bad. Well, really, this is a brand that they politicized critical race theory and turned it into something that is not. It had nothing to do with the color of a person's skin. Former Vice President Pence, is that his name, Pence? Pence said critical race theory should not be taught in kindergarten to kindergartners because it will make little white children feel embarrassed about their white skin color. And I said, my God, I said, this has nothing to do with a person's skin color. This had to do with showing how systemic racism has affected us in housing, education, labor, economics, law, politics. It has affected us on all levels of society, and this is for 250 years. We're still going through, our children are still being killed on the streets. And so we said, what we got to do now, since they don't want us to teach it, then we must start teaching it at home, and the church must back up the home. Where are our children going to get their history? Carter G. Woodson, the father of black history, said, if a person does not know their history, they will soon become a negligible part of society and will become, and soon their history will become extinct because nobody knows who you are. If nobody knows who Wesley Bruce is, for all intents and purposes, Wesley Bruce does not exist because nobody knows who you are. Your history gives you self-identity. It gives you self-esteem, self-value, and self-worth. Russians would not have known they were Russians. It was their history that told them they were Russians. Chinese did not know they were Chinese. It was their history that told them you're Chinese. And so it's the same way. What do we know about our history? Our history has been corrupted, distorted, hidden from us, left out of history books. Black history is American history, and they don't want to recognize that, and that's the problem. And neither do some of us. When it comes to reparations, they owe us reparations. The system of white supremacy owe us reparations. What do you mean, preacher? I used to be on a reparations committee in South Florida, in Fort Lauderdale area. And I used to talk with those, I used to sit on those committees with the Mayor's Race Relations Council. I've sat there, collective groups in the community, trying to build banks and finance for black people. Brand new supermarkets that will give us fresh vegetables, fresh meats and foods for our children so that they can learn in school in the morning. So what I'm saying, Saints, is this. What this thing has done about critical race theory now is spreading all across the Republican or the rights politician states. They want to affect your vote, and they want to disannul your vote. Plus, they want to make sure you never tell the true story about what they did. I have a presentation that I do called 100 Years of Lynching. And I say that people don't realize that lynching was a part of your history. Have you ever seen anybody lynched? I grew up in the 60s in the South. I drank water from the colored water fountain. I got my food from paid for it in the front of the restaurant, had to pick it up in the back of the restaurant. I had to sit on my porch and people run by at nighttime and call me, hey, the N-word, and shoot at us, and we had to duck and hide while we're sitting on the porch. Ku Klux Klan used to come in our neighborhood. Almost caught me one night. I was 4 years old. I still remember the black car rolling up. I still remember the black shoes I saw on the ground. I still remember me crawling out of that box crying for my father, whose name was Bubba. His name is Cleveland Bruce. And I said, Bubba, Bubba. And I'm crawling, trying to run, and the Ku Klux Klan with his hood, they had hoods on. And they said, come here, little N-word. And I was running for my life. My father stepped out of the back door with a shotgun, and that's what made them get to stepping. I know what it means to be put in fear when you haven't done anything. I know what it means when you get out of the military. Here I am, spent 9 years in the Marine Corps. When you come out, they give you a batteries of tests. So I said, the psychologist asked, what do you want to do? I said, well, I'm going to college. He said, well, by these tests, you better go on and stay where you wanted to do in cooking, because I went to cooking and catering school. 3 years I went to high school for cooking and catering because I wanted to open my own business. So he said, well, you better stay there because you'll never make it in college. And I said, okay, I'm going to fix him. I went to college just because he told me, and I went and got the bachelor's and the master's, and I'm working on the PhD. I'll get that later down the road. I'll get it eventually. But I'm saying what these people do, all the stuff that they've done to you, they don't want us to talk about it. Keep your mouth shut, because our children will be embarrassed if they really learn how we did it. Took all the land from the Native Americans. And most of those Native Americans that you see, they say red skin, they were black skin. I got pictures of them. When, I'm going to get into this right now.
Sin causes guilt, children. Sin causes guilt.
Yes.
And that's what the problem is right there, problem with sin and guilt. And so people don't want to be reminded of the sins of the past. So we'd rather believe that everything was good. We treated the N-words.
Yeah.
You know, we fed them, we took care of them,
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff, because then it makes people feel better about themselves.
Right. But they, go ahead.
I have is that we think that if we don't confront, we think that we can get by without confronting our past.
No.
And that is where we're struggling. And like you
Yeah.
said, some of us, I heard one of my own members said to me this morning at Ewing, before we started divine worship, that we should never talk about these things in church.
I know. I've been dealing with that for 30 years, Doc. We shouldn't talk, but I dare you to go in the synagogue this morning and tell a Jew not to talk about the Holocaust. They will run you out of the church. Because, see, you need to understand, the only time that Adventist ministers have a time to talk to his people is on Sabbath. What other time is he going to tell you about what's going on, except it's on the Sabbath? And these things affect our livelihood. These things affect us, and we must talk about it on the Sabbath. There's nothing wrong with talking about. God said, teach it to your children when they lie down, when they rise up, when they go out, and when they come in. Tell them how God has dealt with them. If it were not for the mercies of the Lord, all of us would be dead. There would be no black people if it were not for God preserving us. God has done great things. You have 48 million blacks in America. Problem is, as me and Doc was talking during lunch, we cannot unify and come together. That's our problem. We are worried about where we come from locally. I'm African American. I'm Trinidadian. I'm Jamaican. I'm Haitian. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for that stuff to be thrown out of the window. Not to throw your history out the window, but to understand that if we all don't pull together, all of us going to go. This is not a joke anymore, saints. This is serious stuff. They're not playing. Do you think because they tell you that I like you better than I like somebody else from another part of the Caribbean or another part of Africa or another part of America, you think they really mean that? No, they don't mean that. They do that to divide you so they can conquer you. And that's the stuff that keeps killing us, saints, and it breaks my heart. Excuse me. I am serious. It breaks my heart because these are the things that we keep going over and over again. And when we talk about it, you have people that say, like Doc was saying, you know something, we should not be talking about that on the Sabbath. They just killed 215 of our children. And when they say, well, look at the black on the black crime. Well, don't you understand? There's white on white crime, but you don't talk about that. The reason why blacks kill more blacks is because blacks live in a neighborhood where the whole neighborhood is black. Puerto Ricans live in a neighborhood where Puerto Ricans kill more Puerto Ricans. White lives in a neighborhood where whites kill more whites. But why do you always focus on the blacks killing blacks? It's because you want to put out a false story that we are doing something that's different from everybody else. We're more, what do you say? You know what I'm saying.
Or not, sorry to mess with you, but when all of a sudden crates of high-powered rifles show up in your community with the serial numbers erased, how did they get there?
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and one gang said, I gotta take him because I can't let the other gang get it. How
Yeah.
did they get there?
Yeah.
What did somebody do it? I told the people at Ewing the other day, I say, Nixon's advisors say, let's go villainize them on the evening news. And we do it every evening until the public will see them
Yes.
as that.
Yes. They'll do it every day. As a matter of saints, they do that all the time. But let me get to this. Did you know that Africa is not a country, but Africa is a continent? Look at all the things that you get out of Africa. Look at the islands. Look at Africa. Africa is one of the richest continents on planet Earth. Next slide. Next slide. Africa is 3 times the size of the United States. When I flew over Africa for the first time, Africa is huge. You can put 3 United States. You can put China, the United States, Eastern Europe, India. You can put all those in Africa. Africa is huge. Africa has, the population is 800, oh boy. Let me just leave that alone. I don't have time. Yeah, I know. I'm going to leave it alone because it's too much, because I'm not going to get out of here in 45 minutes if I do this. Next slide. Africa produces 70% of the world's cocoa beans. All the cocoa, that chocolate y'all eat, say so, and it's good. It may not be good for you in every case, but 70% of the world's Coca-Cola beans comes out of Africa. Next slide. 65% of cobalt, those are cutting tools, engine parts, are from Africa. 65% of the world's cobalt comes out of Africa. Next slide. 83% of the world's diamonds come out of Africa. 83% of the world's diamonds come out of Africa. Next slide. 71% of the world's gold comes out of Africa. Now do you understand why China is going into Africa so strong now to say the guys they're helping to rebuild the infrastructure? Now do you understand why Brazilians are in Africa and the Chinese are selling those little cheap stuff that they buy for $2 and it's only worth 50 cents and it breaks up as soon as you take it out of the store? Now do you understand they're taking the money and what they're doing, they're leasing the gold and silver and diamond mines for 30 and 40 years. That's because they went to the schools designed by Europeans so they can make themselves rich instead of enriching the people. The gold and diamond belongs to the people. The power belongs to the people, not to the politicians. But that's what they say. Next slide. 22% of the world's copper comes out of Africa. Look what else comes out. Look at petroleum and natural gas, iron, cotton, crude oil, coffee, grains, tea, gold down in South Africa, copy. Africa is rich. Next slide.
Just to go back on that previous slide, there's something there that is
Go back to the next slide, my sister.
uranium.
Uranium.
Uranium is used to make nuclear weapons. The most natural occurrence of uranium is in Niger.
It's in Niger? Wow. Interesting.
Not one country in Africa has a nuclear weapon.
Doc, you said something. That's a bombshell, Doc.
Okay, everything is mined out of Niger into the United States, into Europe. Africa does not have one nuclear weapon. If you have a nuclear weapon, you cannot be invaded. You know that, right?
Yes.
If you have a nuclear weapon, you cannot be invaded. Okay? Every ton of uranium, 238, is shipped out of Africa to the countries that have nuclear weapons. South Africa was trying to develop
Ooh, Lordy.
a warhead, but they were discouraged. Yeah. Right? But no country in Africa has a nuclear weapon.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah.
No one has, and if you want to go to build a nuclear weapon, you need uranium.
Yes.
It's the hardest thing to get naturally. Look at Iran has been trying for
Yes. Yes.
but it occurs naturally in Africa.
Thank you. Doc, we appreciate that, man. That's a mega bomb there. Because then you begin to think, you mean to tell me out of all these years, Africa does not have a nuclear weapons program in all the 54 countries in Africa, and yet these other countries are having, and Africa is the richest continent on the planet. He who controls your natural resources controls the land. And they're controlling Africa's natural resources. That's why I've got a book I've been trying to write for 15 years, and I haven't written it yet, but I'm now settling down to try to write it. And you know what it's going to be entitled? Strangers in My Father's House. Because what they did, they came in and they raped the country of all its natural resources, and they control the whole continent because of what they did with the natural resources in the land. And I personified Mother Africa and made her a woman when they raped my mother, took her jewels, threw them to the ground. And what they did, they raped, and they still continue to rape Mother Africa. And yet you got Nigeria have some of the rich, I don't know, the oil wells in Nigeria are powerful, but the poor people in Nigeria are poor. They're not getting anything.
Same thing in Sudan. Same thing in South Sudan.
Yes,
Karl Marx once said, whoever controls economics controls every other institutions.
that's true.
And that is so evident what is going on.
That is so true, Doc. And we must keep the people abreast of this. You can't hide it. This is true. Let's go. Let's go to the next slide. 25% of the world's manganese for making steel comes out of Africa. Next slide. There are people now forgotten, discovered while others were yet barbarians, who discovered the elements of the arts and sciences. A race of black people now a race of people now rejected for their black skin and woolly hair, who founded the study of the laws of nature, those civil and religious systems which still govern the universe. That was Count C.F. Volney in 1789, a white scholar who said these words. We were the ones that gave them education. We were the ones that gave them, we're the first mathematicians. We built those pyramids. Your ancestors did that. And I think Doc was talking to the table. He was talking about some of the, we talk about that. That'll mess up my program right now, Doc. Because
We had the greatest library on the face of the earth.
yes, we did. Alexandria, Egypt was there. And Napoleon came with 189 of his scientists, and they took those materials and burned the Royal Library in Alexandria, Egypt down to the ground. They took the knowledge, and Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle put that knowledge and said they wrote the impossible. They did not write anything. As a matter of fact, Socrates was black, but you never see any more statues. They destroyed all of his black statues. I got a picture, a writing of Socrates, his diary. He says, I am black. And I got a picture of one of the last black statues that we have of Socrates. Socrates, yeah. And we got the picture of him. But see, what they teach you in school, they'll have all those white pictures. That's what you think. Everybody's white. No, they're not. Next slide. This race of blacks are the very ones to which we owe our arts, our sciences, and even the use of the spoken word. All these are Africans. On the left top corner, that's a mummy. But you see how the hair of that mummy is? If the mummy, that's why you had Afro picks in the tombs. You didn't find no comb in there. You found Afro picks because the hair and the wigs that they wore were Africoid. All right, look. Where the arrow is right there, right here, that's Narmer. That's the first pharaoh of Egypt.
Can you tell me, look at his nose?
Next slide. Adam and Eve, Genesis 2:7, and the Lord formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed in his nostrils the breath of life, and man became. Those are real grapes, by the way. Those are not artificial. Those are real grapes. No, there's nothing wrong with that. Saints, let me tell you something. Christians and the way we've been taught, basically from Europeans, are the most messed up people when it comes to sex in our lives. You know why? Because we do not understand that God made sex to be enjoyed between married couples. The first commandment that God gave, thou shalt have sex. And he says, have sex as often as you can. And he says, when you don't have sex and you give yourself to fasting and prayer, when you finish the fasting and prayer, come back and have sex so the devil won't come between you. She says, sex is sacred. Sex is sacred. I don't care how old you are. I'm going to tell you something my children ask me. Doctor, they ask me, Daddy, when you and Mommy get older, are y'all going to still be having sex? I said, until they close the casket. I said, no. But they said, Daddy, ooh. I said, what are you talking about? I said, sex is natural. God made sex to be enjoyed between married couples. And see, what Christians have lost is the art of romance. We don't know how to be romantic. When's the last time you gave your wife some flowers? Oh, Lord, don't get me started now. You know, I love family life. That's what we do, me and my wife. We do family life seminar. Listen, saints, when was the last time the husband went and you pat your wife on the behind?
When was the last time?
Yeah. I better stop this. I better get on back to my stuff now. But listen, I'm saying that to say this. God meant for us to be romantic with each other. There was a time I couldn't hug my wife in church. I thought that was sacrilegious. Doc Samuels, Doc Davis going to mess me up if I keep listening to him.
But seriously, Doc, reality is that the old people, they got it from the other people and thought that there was something wrong
Yes.
with showing affection.
Yes.
You
True.
know, and unfortunately it messes up.
That's
why
true.
we get to say you.
That's true. You need to touch your wife, touch your husband, kiss them, hug him, because see, they're not going to always be there. You better enjoy her and enjoy him while you have time. Enjoy your mate. God gave you, I'm enjoying mine, I tell you that. I look and see what she has on when she goes to bed. I compliment her on what she's wearing when she goes to bed. I go to Victoria's Secret and I buy her what looks nice when she goes to bed. No, I'm serious. I'm not kidding. No. Saints, I don't care how old you are. Man, look. Lord have mercy. Jesus, help me. We're supposed to do these things because this strengthens our relationship. I told my wife, I'll buy 52 outfits, one for every week. Because every night when she comes to bed, I'm looking, I said, what you got on now? Let me see. Let me see. And I say that because I love her. I say that because I appreciate her. And I tell her, there are times that you have to take time and look your wife in the eye, look your husband in the eye, and tell them, you know what I appreciate about you? You've stuck with me all these years. And you've been faithful. And because of that, I really love you. I really care about you. You got... Lord have mercy. Let me get on and get finished with this. Let me get back here. All right, next slide. All right, this is a picture of Africa around 200 BC. This is, Doc, with some of what you were talking about at the table. Africa was one Pangea. They were one place. Next slide. Did you know that in Genesis chapter 10, verses 1 to 32, Japheth is the father of the Caucasians. Here are Japheth's children. Gomer were the Indo-Europeans coming out of Turkey. Magog were the Bulgarians near Russia. Javan were the Greeks. Tubal and Meshech were the Russians. Tiras were the Thracians. Now, the Thracians were the early people in Rome. Some of them were black, too. I got some pictures of them. And then Ashkenaz were the Germans, and the Tarshish were the Spaniards. These were all Japheth's children, the descendants of which were Caucasian people. And you see, I left that up there for you to see the others too, but we're going to move on. Next slide. You see the Cush, Shem, and Japheth, all three of them were black. When the flood came, they migrated. When the ship landed in southwestern Turkey, they migrated back into Africa and southern Arabia, and that's where they stayed, and that's where it spread out after the flood. Next slide. You see where Japheth is? That's where Japheth was, up there. And then you see Shem was over here. And then Ham. Ham descended to all in Africa. You see the yellow colors, the orange colors, those were Ham's descendants. You see that Ham had more descendants than anybody. And they were all over the world. Next slide. Now, Japheth, we shared with this before, the Greeks, Japheth's descendants also, the Greeks, the Aryans came out of India. Around 1500 BC, the Aryans, who lived up in the caves in the mountains of Europe, came thundering out into the Indus, which is the India River Valley, and the Nile River Valley, which is Egypt. They came out there, Magog, and you've seen that before. That's enough. Next slide. And he spake, that's another one. I just want you to see the picture. You see whom the children had, and you see who they were. Shem had Eber, Asher, Aram, Joktan, and Ham had Sabtecha, Dedan, Sheba, Reumah, Saba, and had many others. Next slide. Shem had Elam. Elam were the Persians. Now, the Persians were mixed. Asher were the Assyrians. Arphaxad were the Hebrews. They called them Hebrews. They were the ones that crossed the river, across the Tigris and the Euphrates River. Those people were black. I got pictures of most of those early people. Lud were the Semites, and the Aram are the Semites. Now, Semite referred anciently to language, not to skin color. But they've changed it and made it skin color now. Oh, you're Semitic. No, Semitic referred to the language. The Afro-Semitic languages are out of Ethiopia and all those places. They're African Semitic languages. Next slide. History of confirming the truth of God's word. We're going to show you. Next slide. Ham and his sons. Cush was Ham's oldest son. Cush is the father of the Ethiopians. Mizraim is the Hebrew word for Egypt. The Egyptians did not call themselves Egyptians. They called themselves Kemet. They described themselves in the hieroglyphics, which hieroglyphics were the ancient Egyptian sacred writings. They described themselves as a burnt piece of charcoal called the black people, or the black-headed people. Then Put were the Libyans out of North Africa. They were the Cyrenians. Then Canaan was the father of the Canaan. That was Ham's youngest son, the father of the Canaanites. There were 11 nations: Zidonians, Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgasites, Hivites, Arkites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Those were the descendants of our ancestor, Brother Ham. Next slide. Cush is the father, you know that already. I just said that, and you see that. That's us. You can see us. Look at the noses and lips. We have sharp noses. We have all kind of different. We have everything everybody else has because we are the mothers and fathers of everybody. Next slide. These are the ancient Cushites, saints. See that feather and that red ochre paint? I don't know why this slide came out a little. Next slide. These are the ancient Cushites. Look at them. If you go into Africa today, near the Ethiopian, there's ancient Sudan, where Sudan is now, you find them have the same kind of dress with the red ochre paint in their hair and the feather sticking out of their head, out of their hair. Next slide. Cush. Next slide. Cush. Next slide. Modern day Cushites. Now that was ancient Cush. This is modern day. The same Cushite, the descendants of the old Cushite. This is a modern day Cushite. Next slide. Modern day Cushites. Beautiful people. Next slide. Modern day Cushite. Look like somebody you know? All right, next slide. Modern day Cushites. Beautiful people. Next slide. This book I want to recommend to you is called The Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Cushite Empire by Drusilla Dunjee Houston. It is a this book will take you into ancient India and show you who the Dravidians were. The Dravidians were the early people in India, and they were black. Black as coal. Get that book. It's a very good book. I got it all. Mine is all marked up. I gave one to a brother in Africa, and he still talks about that book. Yeah, you can take a picture of it. All right. Everybody got what you got? Yes. All right. Next slide. What did the ancient Egyptians look like? Now, guess who this Pharaoh is? You know, in the Bible, when the Bible mentions the Pharaoh named Taharka, he mentions the name Taharka. That's Taharka in the Bible. That's Taharka. The two serpents over his asp, rule of Upper and Lower Egypt. Next slide. Here is Tutankhamun, the boy king. I went into his tomb when I was in Egypt. I was there for almost a month. I crawled through those pyramids and tombs. I went into his tomb, and I saw him. He's real short, though, as I told the congregation this morning. He's real short, but he was black as this. He was real black. Next slide. Another Pharaoh. You see the nose and lips. See, I told you some of the lips of black people are thin. All black people don't have thick lips, you know. You know, some of us got those big lips you can blow a hot bowl of soup cool with one blow. Say that again. Okay. Next slide. This is a handsome brother. That's a Pharaoh. These were the ancient Egyptians. Next slide. Here's Akhenaten and his wife. Look at they holding hands. When was the last time you held your wife's hand?
I need a picture of Hatshepsut.
Hatshepsut?
Hatshepsut, the one that I think is Moses' mother.
No, Queen Hatshepsut was the one that found baby Moses in the river. Hatshepsut, I got a picture of her. Look, saints, I'm fascinated by ancient Egypt. I said, I wonder who that Pharaoh was that found baby Moses. The Pharaoh was that was ruling in the time Moses was born. I found this picture. He's black as a piece of coal. I said, I wonder who the daughter of Pharaoh was who found baby Moses in the river. I researched, I found her picture. She is black. I said, I wonder who the Pharaoh was when God told Moses, tell Pharaoh to let my people go. I researched, I got his picture. He was black. And so I researched all 30 dynasties, which is ruling families, and I got samplings of pictures out of every dynasty that I could find. And I tell you what, saints, all of them were black. And I got it's entitled Egypt, the Land of Ham. That's what the Bible calls Egypt, the Land of Ham. Next slide. Look at the hair. There she is, right there. There she is with that hairstyle. Cultural continuity. Next slide. This is a Pharaoh. Look at those nose and lips. Now, he's a brother for sure. Next slide. Now, you know he's a brother. His name is Sure, S-U-R-E, Sure. And he was one of the pharaohs. I forget what dynasty he was in, but he was an ancient Egyptian pharaoh too. Next slide. Mentuhotep. I believe he was in the 12th dynasty, but this brother is a bad. He's got the red helmet, which means he was the ruler of, I forget now, southern or northern Egypt. I forget which one it was right now. My brain is tired. Next slide. Here is Ramses the Great. Ramses the Great had over 100 children. He had about 70 wives. He believed. Next slide. Here's another picture of Ramses. Next slide. That's an Egyptian. I got these pictures. I took that picture myself. They show you the features of these ancient Egyptians, that they look like you. Next slide. Here's a picture called Amenemhet III, a pharaoh with locks, dating back to 3,873 years before Jesus. Let me share something with you, saints. You see those dreadlocks? That's why I said dreads didn't come out of Jamaica. They came out of Africa. I want to show you something, saints. This is very important. You see this pharaoh here? He's what we call the Hyksos. The Hyksos were the pharaohs that ruled Egypt for 100 years, and they were non-Egyptian, but they were black Asians coming out of Asia. They ruled this area for 100 years. Remember the Bible said when Joseph became prime minister of Egypt, these are the people that he came prime minister under were the Hyksos. That's why when Joseph had died, and about 200 years later, a pharaoh rose up that knew not Joseph. That's why they enslaved the Hebrews, because they said Joseph was with our enemies, those Asians that came out of Asia and ruled our country for 100 years, then we can't trust them. We got to enslave them. That's why they put the Hebrews in slavery. Next slide. Another pharaoh. I know it's late. We getting there. Next slide. I'll hasten up now. Next slide. Next slide. It's another pharaoh. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Now you know that's us. Lord have mercy. Next slide. Next slide. This is a bad sister. This is Queen T. There were 5 black women that ruled Egypt. Black women have always been powerful. There are 5 of them that ruled Egypt. God gave them that ability. Next slide. These are modern day Egyptians. Saints, stop. Why don't you see this on National Geographic? All you see are Arabs that are supposed to be the ancient Egyptians. But the Arabs are not indigenous Egyptians. They conquered Egypt in the 5th century AD. The real Egyptians are these people. If you want to see the real Egyptians, go south near Sudan, called the place called Elephantine Island. You will see Egyptians as black and blue as coal. They're the real indigenous people there. Next slide. These are the ancient Egyptians. Why don't you see this on National Geographic? Next slide. These are beautiful modern day Egyptians. You don't ever see this anywhere on TV. Next slide. Look at these Egyptians here. They got blonde hair, but not because they miscegenated with white folk. That's our natural gene pool. Next slide. Look at these 2 beautiful young ladies. Modern day Egyptians. Next slide. Modern day Egyptians. Next slide. What did the father of the Libyans look like, or the Cyrenians? This is what they look like. Next slide. Next slide. So try to get as close to the nose and lips as I could. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Canaan was the father of the Canaanites. What did they look like? And here what the Canaanites look like. Next slide. There are no existing Canaanites. They were all absorbed. Next slide. Canaanites. Next slide. Canaanites. Next slide. Canaanites. Next slide. Canaanites. Next slide. These are Canaanites also. Next slide. Canaanites. Next slide. Canaanites. They're the Philistines, which were Canaanites. Did you know the Philistines were black? Yeah, they were. Next slide. Here's, the Bible calls him Hazael. This is a biblical character. Canaanite king called Hazael. It's in the Bible. Next slide. Here's a Canaanite deity. Next slide. Canaanite deity. Next slide. Canaanites. Next slide. Some more Canaanites. Next slide. Now listen, did you know that the first people in Asia were black people? See, the people you see in Asia now migrate, they're not the indigenous people that were there. When they came out of Africa, your people went into Asia, and they began to, this is the first, Yusuke is the first black samurai of Japan. That's a bad brother. Look at him. He doesn't play. He got 2 swords. Next slide. These are black Chinese. Next slide. Wait a minute, she jumped.
No, she said black Chinese because she never heard that before.
All right, next slide. This is Yusuke again. Next slide. These are black Chinese women. These are the Jomo people. Look at the dreadlocks on these black women. They were Chinese. Why don't you see this on National Geographic? Why don't you see this on BBC? Somebody knows something about your history they don't want you to know about your history. It was the Xi and the Shang dynasty that gave China civilization. And they know it. I got a picture of one Chinese geneticist saying, we found out that we came from black people. And Dr. Keith Ching said that this morning, what you saw. They know the truth. These women have dreadlocks. Look at them. These are black Chinese in China. Next slide. This is a brother on the left from West Africa. He has that epicanthic slanted eye. This is a brother from China. Would let you know that they both are the same epicanthic eye. Next slide. Some more black Chinese. Next slide. This is a blacks from Japan. He's of the Ainu people. The Ainu were the indigenous people in Japan. Next slide. Here's a giant. He's a giant, but he's black. Look at the brothers behind him. These are black Chinese. Next slide. Next slide. These are royalty. These are some royal black Asians. Next slide. Some more royal. Next slide. Next slide. Now this is a picture of the blacks in Hawaii. These are the indigenous people in Hawaii. Did you know that the first king and first queen of Hawaii were black? I got their pictures. And I got their royal seat. All of them were black. Next slide. These are the Ainu people in Japan. Next slide. Ainu out of Japan. Next slide. Ainu out of Japan. Next slide. Samurai warrior, Ainu, out of Japan. This is a sister out of China. She got a hand on her hip. She means business. She's not playing with nobody. Next slide. Ainu people out of Japan. Next slide. This is a park that was dedicated to the Ainu people in Japan. Look at the statue of that Ainu person there. Next slide. These are black Koreans. See, they hide this stuff from you, won't let you see it. Next slide. These are Koreans bound down to black statues of God. Next statue, next slide. Next slide. This is black Chinese. You remember in the neighborhoods, I know in New York, we used to have people say, watermelon. They'd come by and say, watermelon. They'd holler out of the side, and watermelon, and people would come out and buy watermelon. But this is in China. Look, he's calling for something. I don't know what he's selling. Looks like peanuts or something in that basket he's got. But you can see he's black. Look at the people standing behind. They're black Chinese. Next slide. Black Asian. He's Asian. Next slide. Next slide. These are the Ainu out of Japan again. Next slide. This is a samurai warrior married to an African woman. Next slide. Black Asians. Next slide. Don't have time to tell you what the white paint means on there, but these are black Chinese too. They're at a wedding. These are blacks in Asia too. Go right ahead to the next one. Next slide. Next slide. The original Australians, the original Asians, the original people out of Latin descent, the original people in the Philippines, the indigenous people in India, and the original people in the Indies, India also. These were black people. Some of them are still there now. Next slide. These are the blacks in Vietnam. They were called Champa Kings. I was in Vietnam in 1967. I was on patrol up in the mountains, and I came through a village, and we were stopped there because we were searching the village. And 3 black kids came out of the village, said, "What's happening, soul brother? Give me some dap." I said, "Man, where did y'all come from?" They said, "We live in this village." I said, "You live here in this village?" They said, "Yeah, we live here." And when I started researching it, when I got home a year later, I found out these were the indigenous people in Vietnam. Next slide. Next slide. These are called the Champa Kings. You know that's us. Next slide. Next slide. These are the modern Vietnamese. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. These are the black Etruscans that I told you about. These are the early people that came before the Italians in Italy there. Next slide. Etruscan. 600 BC. Next slide. Next slide. Now, I rest my case. History indeed reveals that the descendants of Ham were black people. The Bible said it, and now science has and is confirming it. There is no black race or white race. There's only one race, and that is the human race. Within the human race, we have variety: black, white, red, brown, and yellow. Hue, man. Hue means black, means man of color. Human means man of color. Next slide. And I say Hotep, and that means peace. In Jewish language, they say shalom. We in Africa have a word for peace, Hotep. Yem Hotep, my brother, my sister. Yem Hotep, I greet you in peace. Shem Hotep, my brother, my sister, I leave you in peace. So Hotep, do you have any questions? And if you have any questions, I know that this has been a long day, but if you have any questions, I can try to answer some as best I can. Yes? Yeah, they spoke English. Yeah, they were speaking English. Matter of fact, they were talking, say, what's happening, soul brother? Okay, anybody? Yes. I didn't hear. Oh yeah, Haile Selassie says that he was the yeah. I don't know whether I don't know too much about Haile. I know what the Rastas believe about Haile Selassie and what they believe, who he was, but I don't know too much about the history of Haile Selassie. I know something about him, but not enough to talk about it in the sense that I could answer your question. You know?
Legend has it
Yes.
that, and history has it that he came from royalty, we know that.
Yeah.
His family ruled Ethiopia for centuries, right? Here's the bad thing. After Haile Selassie got overthrown and the family finished, Ethiopia has never been the same.
Right.
Okay? He's highly educated.
Right.
My father saw him, he came to the Caribbean, you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. Very.
And then when he went to Geneva, and that's what's impressed about Haile Selassie. When he went to Geneva for the Geneva Conference, and he said to them, I'm going to tell you that the two worst leaders in the world today, right? Adolf Hitler, right? Mussolini, and he said the Emperor of Japan is not far behind.
Wow. Boom. Yeah, he was. And see, the good thing about Ethiopia was never conquered. And I don't want everybody to, yes. Go right ahead, sir.
Okay, I see something that said something about 36,000 before Christ. 3,600 before Christ. But they're saying the earth is just about 6,000 years.
Okay, let me share something with you. I know what you're saying. Most of us believe that the earth is no older than 6,000 years old. That's what many of us have heard. And that comes from one of the Baptist ministers who put out I forget his name right now, put out a thesis that the earth it was 4,000 years before the flood came, and then 2,000 would make 6,000 years. But now what I used to do, when I do Black history for the last 30 years, I always call the Biblical Research Department at the GC. I call the Ellen G. White Estate to make sure I'm in harmony with the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy. Because I want to make sure that I don't teach anything. If I have a personal belief, I will not share it with my congregation. Yes, sir. I leave that alone because the Bible says the secret Where the Bible stops, that's where I stop. But I did get an answer from the Biblical Research Department. And I asked them the question, I said, what is the official belief of the Seventh-day Adventist Church on the point of how old biological life on this earth is? He said, biological life on this earth is our official position is 6,000 to 8,000 years. I said, does Ellen White mention? He said, Ellen White mentions, I have her document. Ellen White says the earth is older than 6,000 years. I have that in my folders. What happens is that the earth, the substance, the rocks, they could be trillions of years old. But biological life on this earth is relatively young, according to what we believe. So that's what it is.
You said you went into the tomb of well-known Pharaoh.
Tutankhamun.
Was that in the Valley of the King?
Yes.
Or the Valley of the King?
Mhm.
Something that I saw two places, two of them. If you're facing, the building is faced this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's one that way and another one that way. I went into that one and another one, but there was one that they said we couldn't get into.
Yeah. They have them closed because,
Going on.
yeah, they're fixing them up.
Which way was the one that you entered into? Because there was no light.
Yeah. Sometimes they had some closed when we were there too. They closed them because they're doing repairs, and if you go down there and something caves in, that's it, man. You're not going to get out, you know. Yeah. Yeah. Well, see, I know. Yeah. I went into the one that go down 240 feet. You have to go down a ramp, and you go down, and when you come in, you open up into a room something like this, twice as large as this. Mine was on the. What year did you go?
About 3 years ago.
Oh, I went in 2009, so it might have been open then. You know, the one that I went in was open. So I went into Tutankhamun. They might have moved it because now they just built a brand new Cairo museum that's twice as large as the Cairo museum that they had there. And I can't wait to get back to go see it. You visited that one too? Oh, man, that's beautiful. I haven't gotten there yet, but we plan to go next year or the year after. But that's about the best I can take. But biological life, 6,000 to 8,000 years is our official position. But the earth could be trillions of years. The earth, we don't know when God created those planets and things. He created them trillions of years ago, spoke them into existence. We just don't know. And yes. No, but people keep telling me that, and I do plan to get something. Pray for me, sis. I just got out of this heart surgery thing, so I'm trying to recover. And but I will get back to him. My son said, Dad, take it easy, because I'm fired up. I want to do what I want to do, but I can't. Yes, sir.
When you use the term Pharaoh or Ramses, is that similar to like a king or something?
Yeah. Pharaoh, Pharaoh means a great house. That's what the name of Pharaoh means, great house. The king was the personification of the deity. He was the living, according to the Egyptian belief, they were the representation of the deity of God. And they were supposed to keep the people safe. If the Pharaoh didn't keep it, they would kill him. That's what it was. And I've gone over my time. That's why I don't want to.
So that is why God said to Moses, I will make you a garden in front of Pharaoh.
Yes. Yes. Because that was the belief. That's pretty good, Albert. I didn't cook that up myself, but I don't want people to, because I know people are getting ready to leave now. It's late and it's tired, and I don't want to wear you out.
Okay.
So I'm going to leave. Yes, sir. Some of them were connected with God. What happened, the ancient Egyptians, Tertullian, who was one of the early church fathers of the Christian church, he was an African brother, he said, that we call Christianity was practiced by the ancients a long time ago. Here's what I know. God did not wait until Moses was born and twiddle his thumbs and wait till Moses was born to give people the Ten Commandments. Those commandments were in existence long before Moses was born. The Sabbath was in existence way at creation time. So the law was unwritten, but it was known. And so when you look at it like that, you have to understand it in that sense, that a lot of these people, they walked away from God, they perverted the nature of God, and they started worshiping nature rather than God. A lot of that happened back with ancient Egyptians and everybody else.
One of the depictions, the diagrams, you said that Ham was monotheistic.
He was what?
Monotheistic, God meaning they worship the Hebrew God, which was one God. And Japheth and Shem were polytheistic, their offspring. That was one of the slides that they showed.
Yeah, that's an artist rendition. Now, you had a lot of them worship polytheism.
Polytheistic
Yeah.
Egyptians would have been worshiping many strange, many.
And they had
pagan
many,
gods.
many wives too.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, they had many wives, they had many deities, yes.
Legend has it that when Rome went in to plunder Israel, that the Ark of the Covenant was taken first to Egypt. And I've got some Ethiopian friends, and they claim it's in Ethiopia,
I think it is.
right? And they have priests.
I think it is.
They have priests in this temple that guard the
Lalibela.
ark. Yeah, and it's still there.
Yeah, it is.
And they go to church on Sabbaths.
Yeah.
Bradford wrote a book. Remember that book, right? That when Europe tried to destroy the Sabbath, that the Ethiopians preserved the Sabbath.
They did.
And these priests, they said they're from the tribe of Levi,
Yeah.
right? And they preserved the ark, and they said the ark is still kept there in that temple.
But now, you know that the Jews, the so-called Jews, can't let that happen.
I know.
So the so-called Jews say, we found the Ark of the Covenant in a temple in Jerusalem. That's the biggest fib they could ever tell. I believe it's in Ethiopia. Because Ellen White says that the elders hid the Ark of the Covenant and hid it in a cave. And then there it is in Ethiopia in a cave. So I believe that's where it is. I don't know, I can't prove that, but that's my personal belief. Elder, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Davis. Thank you so much for allowing me to come and speak to your people, Elder.
Thank you, man. You can turn us off now. Disconnect from YouTube. Give me a minute. Elder, talk.
So, how many of you learned something new today?